Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are going to be talking today about learning in an uncertain landscape. It's really relevant topic for a lot of families as we're moving into a new academic year. School has started in some parts of the country. And so being best prepared for the decisions that we're going to need to make and some of the strategies that we may need to use is going to be fairly important as we move forward. So as I always say, and I'll probably say it a couple of times throughout this, please do submit questions. I want this to be as applicable for you guys as possible. We're here with Samantha Feinman, the Director of New Frontiers. I am Casey Schmalacker. I am the Operations Manager. And we really wanted this to be a kind of personal conversation about the tough choices and the tough situations that we're moving into in this uncertain landscape. So what I thought would be useful is, Sam, do you think, do you mind starting off just sharing what your experience was? You're a mother, you have two children, one in middle school, one in elementary school. And I'd love just for you to start off with just sharing your decision process and the things that you're thinking about getting in place to ensure the best learning for your kids and the best situation for your family as a unit. And I just want to emphasize, you're not just making the best decision for your kids, you're making the best decision for the whole family. So if you could just start us off there. And again, as Sam's answering, please submit any questions you may have. So take it away, Sam.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to share. So, like Casey mentioned, I personally have a daughter going into 7th grade, so she's in middle school, and I have a son going into 4th grade in elementary school. And, this, I want to say first and foremost, has been a real struggle, just being an educator myself, but also being a full-time, working a full-time job and running a business. Making the decision about what to do with in terms of, sending the kids back, not sending the kids back in the fall has been a real difficult and topic to manage and to struggle with. I think that I think we, all of parents can agree that, we're struggling with really trying to figure out what is best for our kids, but also keeping them safe. And it's an unfortunate reality of something that we've never really had to deal with before, which is wondering if whether or not sending them to school is safe. I think it's a whole new area that we're getting into that we've never really had to grapple with before. So those two things are always going on in the back of my head when I'm trying to make a decision, or when I was making a decision about what to do with the kids in the fall. So, you're thinking to yourself, like, where are they going to be most safe, but how are they going to get the best education? And, school districts are coming out with their plans now, and I think it's really important, first and foremost, when you're making a decision, to be very well informed about what your schools are doing and what your districts are doing to provide the best level of education for students. And so, really listening and communicating and reading what's coming out from the districts about what it's going to look like when kids go back in the fall is I think first and foremost the most important thing to do. Most schools are coming up either with an in-person, a virtual, or a hybrid model. And, with me, my school district is sending the middle school and elementary school kids back full-time in person. And so that was a very scary concept for me when I just look at it at the surface level. Like, my kids are going back to school full-time. We're in the middle of a pandemic. They're going to be around other people. But then when I started to dive deeper into what the district is doing to manage that, I started to get more comfortable with the idea of them going back to the environment. I know an in-person environment is very advantageous for learning, but I also know that there's safety issues. And so, informing yourself about what it's going to look like and being comfortable with that choice and that level of precaution and safety is really important. With that being said, it's important to also be prepared for, things changing. Things may have to change where the kids come back home, or they have to move to a virtual model, or there's times where they'll be in school and working from home. So I think, making your choice, but then thinking in the mindset of being flexible is really important.
And so with that understanding, you came to the choice of in-person is what worked best for your family. What are the things that you're prepared for that other individuals on this call or professionals that are talking with families, what are the things you're prepared for to be different? And this, again, just to clarify for everyone, this is going to be different for every single district's variety of plans. But what were some of the things that you looked for when you saw the plan to help your kids be prepared for the difference?
Yeah, so I want, obviously safety and precaution, and I think it was important for me to have the conversation with my kids to start to prepare them for how things are going to look different. It was important for me to make sure that they were following the guidelines, that it was realistic to expect my children to be able to participate in that, and that they would still be able to learn. So, I know in my district in particular, they're doing, 3 levels of safety. So they're doing social distancing, 6 feet away, desks are all 6 feet away from each other. They're also providing masks and requiring masks, and they're also doing a desk barrier. So they're, implementing 3 different levels of safety and precaution. But it's interesting because they're saying that 2 of those 3 things are going to be in place at all times. So if you're at your desk with your desk barrier up and your desks are 6 feet away, kids are allowed to take a mask break. But if they get out of their seat and there's potential for them not to be 6 feet away from other people, they have to be wearing their mask. So there's these lot of kind of new rules and systems and routines that are happening in schools that, I think are going to be a little bit of a transition for kids. And I already started talking to my kids about it. And it was very interesting having that conversation with them about it and how it's going to look different, and the types of questions that it started to provoke from them.
And so I do want to shift over to the virtual, but just before we do, what do you think your role? So at the end of last year, parents had a very active role, or they were expected to have a very active role in the learning process. As a parent, what are you prepared for your role to be? Do you expect it going back to normal? Kids come home from school, you just help them make sure that they get their homework done and that's it? Is that what you're prepared for? Or do you see that you're still going to need to be somewhat heavily involved in that, even though they're going back to brick and mortar school?
It's a good question. And I don't know if I have an answer to that. I mean, I think going back to a brick and mortar school, obviously the time during the day is going to be pretty traditional to what my time was before. I don't know. I don't know in terms of how the teachers will be allowed to present the curriculum, whether or not there will be higher levels of expectation at home. So some of the things it makes me think about is if they're splitting the class into 2 and half of the class is getting instruction and the other half isn't, even though they're all in the same building, there may be more homework at home, there may be more requirements of things to do at home. So, I think it's probably pretty much going to be the same, but it certainly will be at an increased level for the students that are going into the virtual or the hybrid models.
And I think I just want to highlight right there, it's just like Sam said, preparing your kids for changes and things are going to be different. I like how you're highlighting, yeah, I'm hoping that it'll go back to a little bit of normalcy in your role, but you're prepared for it not to be that. You're not setting that as the expectation. You're prepared for you might need to adapt a little bit more from that old norm. So I do want to shift gears. And before we get to kind of talking about what a hybrid model might look like, I want to talk about the virtual aspect. And so I want to start off this question with last year, whether college age or whether high school, middle school, elementary, there was this idea that it didn't count. There was this idea of we're adjusting and making exceptions for this stuff. I wanted to see what you think families need to be prepared for, and are the grades important, or is it more important about the learning? I see things froze up a little bit. Did you get that question, Sam?
Nope.
Okay, so I apologize for that. So last semester, the end of last year, we kind of hedged our bets. It was, this doesn't count, it's okay, it's a once in a lifetime type thing. What's different as we go into this next year if we go into a virtual model? What do you think is different as far as our expectations should be?
My expectation would be, the hopes that there would be more live and dynamic instruction. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the case, but I think that live instruction is really important for the students. When students have a limited access to their teachers, they have less of an ability to access the curriculum and really learn the curriculum rather than just get through it. And I think that was a big problem with the fall, in that there was a lot of just getting through assignment, not really learning anything from them.
And so you and I have talked about, and many of you, unless you're professionals, may not have heard this term of explicit instruction. And there's certain steps to it, but without going through the entire process, what was a missing component in virtual learning that we can hope teachers do more of, but is limited in the virtual landscape, that we may need to do a bit more focus on as families to support kids in the learning process? Did I freeze up again?
Yeah. I think, yeah, but now.
So what I was asking about is that this piece of explicit instruction, without going into what it specifically is, what's missing? And you started talking about it a little bit, but I'd love to hear more about the difference between independent practice and guided practice, and how virtual learning doesn't enable that piece. So I'd love you just to talk a little bit about that, because that's something that families might be able to help with if the schools aren't able to provide it.
Sure. So, I can actually give you an example of this from the end of last year. And so my son was taking a French class, and he was learning how to say I like or I don't like certain fruits and vegetables in French. And so he was learning I like, he was learning colors, and he was learning the names and fruits and vegetables names, but he was also learning how to put the nouns and verbs together in the French language. So I sat down with him to do this work with him, and guided practice is, explicit instruction is this is what we're learning. Now you're going to practice it, and I'm going to provide you with corrective feedback and support to make sure that you learn it correctly. And then once I see that you can do it on your own, I back away. So it's this level of scaffolding that gives students just a little bit of help. And that's what in-person dynamic instruction allows for. And so when if I wasn't sitting down with him to do this assignment of putting together the nouns and the verbs in the proper order and seeing the pattern and identifying the pattern, he would type into Google, translate into French, I like red apples. And so, you know, he's not getting from the experience without the instruction in the guided practice, the whole purpose in doing the assignment, which is to learn those noun verb combinations. He was just plugging into Google, because kids these days are very well versed in how to use the internet and Google, how to get the right answer. He wasn't actually learning anything from the activity. And so you know, when we look at virtual instruction, we want to see, is there live instruction embedded? And then what are the expectations of the follow through for assignments and for practice? And are our children in a virtual model really learning from what they're required to do? Or are they just completing the assignment for the sake of saying they were able to get it done? And we really want to embed that learning experience as much as we have to if it's lacking in that virtual model. You know, I do want to say, as an aside, this isn't always easy for parents to do or interject themselves into, because sometimes school can be a very difficult, emotional, and emotionally charged topic between children and parents, especially as they get older. My daughter, who's now going into 7th grade, wants nothing. She wants me to have nothing to do with her schoolwork. And so for me to put, you know, to put myself into the situation and say, okay, let's sit down, I want to do this with you, she's going to say, Mom, leave me alone. I've got it. You don't need to help me. She's really trying to build, as adolescents do at that age, you know, agency and independence and autonomy. And so the last thing she wants to do is have her mom help her with her homework. But there may be things that she needs help with. So she's got to get some help from somebody if she doesn't accept it from me. And so that's something, you know, with virtual learning, we want to keep an eye on. Do they need help? And if so, and they're not accepting it from us, where can they get the help from to make sure they're actually getting something from the experience?
And I think I like to use the analogy of learning to drive a car for the learning process, because it's so tangible and the consequences are tangible. So what the virtual learning was in a lot of cases last year was describing to someone how to just drive a car and then putting them in the driver's seat without anyone sitting with them and saying, go. Now, maybe they were in an empty parking lot. They didn't get into an accident. They succeeded in not hurting themselves or hurting any others. But that doesn't mean they learned to drive. They just got through unscathed. And so the difference when we talk about explicit instruction, that's like your parent sitting next to you when you're learning to drive and being able to say, you pressed the accelerator too much, that's why it jerked. You pressed the brake. And teachers, the difficulty, and no matter how good teachers are, it's hard to do this guided practice step of explicit instruction because they're not in front of them. They're behind a screen. You can't see the work they're doing. So what was kind of happening is they were just putting them in the car and saying good luck. And what was expected was that the parents got into the seat instead of the teachers. And so there's one other important piece I like to put in there. It's not just about being over their shoulder to check their work. It's giving the corrective feedback. So you wouldn't put someone that never saw a car into that passenger seat to give the feedback. Now, as a parent, you don't have to be an expert. Maybe you haven't driven in 30 years. You could still give like appropriate feedback. But if you're not versed in anything at all, you at least need access to the correct method or correct answers. I've supported people in content areas that I don't know about, but I make sure I have the answers in front of me to be able to say, well, that was incorrect. What can we do correct? So as a parent, if you are so far removed from the content they're trying to access, you're not going to be the best person to supplement that guided practice. What you might need to do, and this is both college and then high school and middle school, is support your child in getting that corrected feedback. Ask the teachers for extra help. Attend office hours. Get that feedback from some source. But it's not just about the grades. It's the actual process of learning. And so I wanted to just now shift, and again, everyone in the audience, if you have more specific questions on these, please jump in. But what are some of the concerns of a hybrid model? I know I described to you, Sam, a school that I heard about that is doing 3 days in person, like doing modules for people, different cohorts, 3 days 1 week, 2 days the next week, 1 day the following week. And I could see your eyes kind of roll behind your head of being overwhelmed. What's important for people to know as far as like why that could be concerning and what the headache might be associated with that? Because I know on the positive end, it's, well, I'm getting the in-person, but then it's also the safety of the virtual, it's less exposure. And I think the benefits of the hybrid are a little bit of a Goldilocks of you think you're getting everything, but I don't think there's enough focus on what other concerns there might be. So I'd love for you to just explore what are some of those concerns of a hybrid model that people might not be thinking of.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think first and foremost, it's new, right? It's something that we really haven't kind of done before. And I think that, on the other hand, from the vast majority of the people I've spoken to, that the school districts are starting in a hybrid model. And so it's a model that is being used very frequently right now, but it's also something I think that we know little about, and whether or not it can be successful. So, I think that it's new and it's going to be interesting, but you really need when you're putting together in-person and virtual, you're talking about having to shift a lot, having to be very organized and understand what you need to be doing when. And it's taking pieces of two models and putting them together. So there's going to be a requirement to be a little bit more flexible in a hybrid model than in an in-person and virtual, because your structure of what your day-to-day looks like is constantly going to be shifting from either in-person to virtual. If you're doing all in-person, you get into a structured schedule. If you're doing all virtual, you get into a structured schedule. But this hybrid model is combining those two things, and depending on what that schedule looks like, and there could be frequent changes, frequent shifting, and that can be a lot for somebody, with executive function deficits, with somebody that has a difficult time transitioning, with somebody that has a difficult time keeping themselves organized. I would be very mindful about keeping a close eye on things not falling through the cracks, because now your level of having to plan and organize and figure out where you need to be when and with what and using what modality is going to be heightened.
I know for me, and I'm an adult professional, but waking up in the morning and figuring out what I have to do, even with consistency, can sometimes be difficult. Where do I have to be? When do I have to be there? Do I have to, do I shower every morning? Do I only shower in the mornings I'm going to school? The more questions that get brought up of what should I be doing creates the more areas for error. Do I need to have homework done? Does it need to be printed? Do I need to submit this to, I'm just thinking about submitting homework. Yeah. Do I have to bring it in hard copy today? Do I have to submit it onto Google Classroom? Do I have to do this? Is it going to be the same thing? Are the teachers remembering this day I have to write down my homework? This day it's emailed to me. there's so many changing expectations that make it difficult to create routines, because now you have to have two separate types of routines, and you have to know which one to access and when.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so just to kind of exemplify when Sam says shifting, it's that, what toolbox am I accessing today? And being aware of that. Were you
Yeah.
going to say something? Yep.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the silver lining of the hybrid model, I think, is though that it does teach flexibility because it's already embedded into the model, right? For students that have a difficult time with being flexible and shifting from one thing to another, it could be a good opportunity for them to practice and learn how to do those things, which is a really necessary skill to have as you become an adult. And so at least, if we're going to look at it as a silver lining, it does expose them to, being able to practice doing these things in an environment where they will have support, because I'm sure that the students, this is going to be a new world for everybody, and that the students will be given a lot of support to transition to it.
And so I want to shift one more time, and I want to go through the three different models and just highlight a little bit more about, I don't want to say character traits, but aspects of a learning profile that would thrive in those environments, but also might bring up concerns in those environments. So like one tangible one that I think of is like in person. There are some people that might have some anxiety, some youngsters that might have anxiety, where being in person, you don't have control over others. And so how do you see that manifesting, like severe rule followers, Sam? Like, how would that impact learning in person? And how do we weigh those two of, yes, they learn better in person, but they're going to be around a lot of people that they can't control. You can't control your environment. So I'd love just to hear some thoughts on that for those that might be suffering from anxiety, those that might not have the most well-developed cognitive flexibility and like those adaptive skills. So what might be some concerns there for like an in-person model?
Well, I think, I think that not knowing that they have to be flexible would be probably, the biggest obstacle first and foremost, and really just trying to help them to understand what it's going to look like and what their responsibilities are as a student in their classroom, and what the responsibilities are of the other people in that classroom, how things are going to look different, and how flexibility will have to come into play, so that there are going to be rules. I mean, I would even venture to say that the rules that are going to have to be followed in in-person classes in the fall are going to be much more strict than the rules in classrooms ever before now. And so it actually may be, an advantage for those kids that are rule followers. But with an understanding that this is a new landscape for everybody, and that kids are going to mess up sometimes. I think of first, second, and third graders going back to school full time, having to remember to wear a mask to go to the bathroom. Like there's going to be a little bit of trial and error in the beginning. So I think that in some aspects, there's going to be more rules that they may thrive upon, but at the same time, those students that have a difficult time following directions or shifting might have a more difficult time learning the new systems and routines immediately, and fall back into what they thought, what their perception of school was when they went to school last time. Hence, a really, really important conversation to have with them before school starts if you're sending them back to in-person. And it's something I spoke to my own kids about. You're going back to the same building, but it's not going to look the same. And so, I thought one of the nice, interesting things that my school district did was they sent pictures around of how the classes look now. because you know it's one thing to say to your children that the desks are going to be 6 feet apart and you're probably only going to have between 10 and 12 kids in each class, and then actually seeing what that looks like. It looks different. The desks are very far apart. They used to work at tables collaboratively before. So it's just preparing them for the new structure and routine and rules, I think can be very comforting. But at the same time, understanding that things need to be a little bit flexible as people get used to this new stuff.
And I just want to highlight that as a universal theme through all of these different models. Previewing, talking about what it's going to look like, talking through where there might be problem areas, talking through, I know you're very good with wearing your mask, but if your peers don't, do you run and tell the teacher right away? Maybe you remind them. Talking through this stuff to help prepare them for what they're going into is for all of the different models for school. It's very important to do that piece. And so like that's just a strategy that's universal with this. I'd love to just hear a little bit, like one other kind of case example that I know comes up a lot with families is maybe those diagnosed with ADHD, maybe they don't even have a diagnosis, but that struggle with sitting in one place. They need the activities. Are they going to be able to play tag outside for lunch? Probably not. There's no contact sports. Is there gym class? Are they going to be learning for this? So where there's more restricted movement, what does that in person, what are some considerations? And you did this without me asking before, but what are some strategies for that we can, parents can start working with their kids on? And actually, just before I jump there, I'm testing your working memory again, Sam. I wanted to just highlight before about the rules before we moved on. There's going to be a lot more rules the younger they are. The older people get, the rules pull back. And they start to get replaced with societal expectations and norms as opposed to strict rules. And the reason why that's important is the rule enforcement as you get older becomes a negotiation between people, whereas when you're younger, you have a teacher to go tell. And so when we're talking about the strategies for this, it's more about engaging with others as you get older. And when it's younger, it's about engaging with an authority. So I just wanted to separate that out for those that might have college students that are here. You're not going to have that authority figure. College campuses are going to have much less rules. They're going to have rules, but they're not going to be enforced as readily. People aren't going to be in the bathroom monitoring what's going on in the bathroom on a college campus. So I just wanted to highlight that to help bridge the gap between talking about the younger ones and talking about the older ones. So just to reiterate the question, Sam, I've already partially forgotten it, but those with difficulty sitting in place, those that require some physical activity, structured breaks, I'd love you to explore that piece. And just to set the table a little bit, there might be less movement between classes. So if you're middle school, high school, you have periods, you're walking between class to class, that's a structured break every 40 minutes or so. Maybe you're not going to different classes. That's possible. You're sitting in one place all day. You don't have gym, you don't have recess in the same way. There's a lot more limited movement. And so how does that impact some learners? I know myself, I don't have a diagnosis of ADHD, but if I can't pace throughout the day, I struggle with focus. So how is that A, important to understand for learning, but B, what might be some things that parents can do to help their kids get ready for that change in environmental learning?
Well, it's an interesting thing because, you know, I think that sometimes a lot of movement can actually be, you know, it can be difficult for students because it's hard for them to get back on track, right? And so, you know, it really is dependent upon student to student. And I like that you brought up this, you know, students with ADHD, because surprisingly, what I heard from a lot of people in the spring was that some of their students, some of their children that had a diagnosis of ADHD were actually doing better at home than they ever had at school. And I found that very interesting, but it makes a lot of sense in some capacity. And in not all students, but some of them, there was a percentage of them, there were less distractions at home. I'm sorry, than at school. At home, they were able to hyper-focus and get their work done. They were comfortable in the environment. They weren't distracted by other things in their environment like they used to be at school. And so I found that very interesting, and it kind of, made me think about that when you asked this question. So less movement and smaller classes with more space in between students, this might actually be an environment that could be of more of an advantage to certain students with ADHD, because there's less of shifting from one thing to another. Because if they're not getting up and having to go somewhere else and come back, then there's less of that having to get back to task and initiating and getting back on track. Now, there are certainly going to be students that really benefit from breaks. And so I think that the families have to try to be as proactive as possible in coming up with some sort of a plan with the school, with the teachers, about how to embed that into this new classroom environment, whether it be taking walks to the bathroom. The other thing that they said, speaking of bathrooms and monitoring, is that for the younger grades, there may be staff monitoring the bathroom, so that maybe only one student goes in at a time, 2 students go in at a time. So if there's monitoring of the bathrooms, and then there's the student that needs breaks from the classroom, having a specific process or protocol and teaching that student to self-advocate for that break. And that may be, giving your teacher a signal that you need to take a break for 2 minutes, setting an alarm on your watch, and being able to walk to the bathroom and back. So, so there has to be some level of proactive communication with the school to develop a plan to help that student still be able to get what they need in terms of breaks. But, it may be much, like you said, it may be much more limited in opportunities and less embedded in the organic experience of school than it ever was in the past.
And my academic executive functioning approach with this is that being able to identify when you need a break is a very high level skill. It happened organically in the more traditional schooling model. You were forced to have breaks to go to your next classroom. It's not having organically. And I think that's a great segue over to a similar situation that I know a lot of families and a lot of students struggled with when working virtually. And I'd love to hear about just some exploration of this idea of breaks in a virtual learning model, how important those may be, and then even just a little bit on for those learners, because often those that may benefit from breaks, the whole ADHD feedback as far as it worked for them, that's awesome. But I'm thinking of those that get distracted easily, that might require those breaks to stay on task. I'd love to hear some of the elaboration of the struggle between defining I'm at school versus I'm at home for those in a virtual learning model, and what parents can help do. You talked about it a little bit earlier about how you sending your kids to school is helping you have a work day. It's going to be much easier of I'm a professional versus I'm a parent because they're going to school. How is that important for those learning virtually? And this isn't even just those that struggle with paying attention, but for everyone. And how can parents help start to set the expectations of you're at school, you're learning versus you're at home?
Yeah, I mean, look, we all know that school was not meant to be home, and home was not meant to be school. There's a reason why we have school, and there's a reason why we have home. And school is a very structured, very rule-based environment with a set of expectations on the students to behave in a certain way throughout the day. And then at home, it's a little bit more loose. Of course, we have rules as parents, but your home environment is not structured the way it is at school. You know, you don't come home from school and have to partake in the same levels of structured behaviors as you do in school. You come home, you have a snack, you watch a little TV, maybe you do some homework, maybe you talk to your friends. So, you know, I think that, you know, what's really important is there needs to be parameters. If students are working virtually, there need to be parameters from between right now is home time and right now is school time, and really identifying the differences between those two things. You know, so one of the things that I did with my children was, what, you know, these are the expectations when you're doing your schoolwork, and these are the expectations when you're just being home. And even though you're doing it in the same environment, it's two different situations and two different buckets of behaviors. You know, I started to see my daughter in the end of the spring laying on the couch with her Chromebook on her lap, doing Google Meetups with her teachers laying down. And I would say to her, would you do that in the classroom? Would you get up and just lay on the floor with your Chromebook on your lap? No. So how can we set up the environment so it is distraction reduced and you are feeling like you're school ready? And so that has to be a specific space that is distraction reduced. You know, it really shouldn't be a place where the family gathers together, because that can be very distracting while students are doing schoolwork, unless everybody's working together. So I'm doing my work at the dining room table and my kids are doing their schoolwork. That's different. We're all working in this, we're all working. But if, you know, I'm cooking dinner and my son is playing a game and my daughter's trying to do work, it doesn't work, because we're all in different places, even though we're in the same location. Does that make sense? So it's like, so really just defining when, you know, through two things: the environment, where you need to be, how you need to behave, but also when you're turning it on, when you're turning it off. And that all comes with the structure of the schedule. You know, many of our kids got out of a routine of any sort of a structured schedule this summer. I think even more so than any other summer before. We had a lack of extracurricular activities this summer. Many camps are closed. You know, those things are all embedded structure, rule-based activities that would help our students and help our children to maintain their school readiness throughout the summer. And a lot of that's been thrown out the window. Kids are staying up all night playing video games. They're waking up at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. They're very out of schedule. So really starting to get ready with creating some sort of a structured schedule again, and then following through with that structured schedule throughout the year is really important in a virtual model. That being said, it's not easy, especially if you're working from home and the expectation is that you're going to be the one navigating and encouraging and facilitating all this while also working a full-time job. It's a lot.
And I love, I don't love, but what's important, I think, with the virtual piece is to differentiate this year from last year. There was justified excuses of not doing well, not putting in as much effort. And I'm focusing a little bit more on college right now, simply because there actually is a choice with college. With high school and middle school, it's not. And so I've spoken with some of our clients and been very clear of, if you're committing to college and it's virtual, you're committing to it. This is a choice you're making. And so the same lines of logic of, but it's a pandemic, but there's this excuse, but there's this reason why I can't succeed, we should arm them now with, that's not going to fly as much as it did previously.
Correct.
We know what we're going into now. It isn't as much of an unknown because you've done it. Now it's different for first-time college students. That is new. But I'm saying those that haven't lived the experience of virtual learning, let's make sure we're arming them with at least partial responsibility of that choice so that they don't feel no accountability for the choice. Because if there's no accountability for the choice, then there's no real drive to try as hard as you can. It leaves room for looking for the excuses. And really important for your pocketbooks, if they are not bought into going full steam ahead and really being accountable, then you're leaving so much room for a blame of it wasn't my fault. And it might be better to defer college for a semester if they're not ready to commit. It's just like forcing someone into college if they don't want to go. You're running a gamble of the investment not being worth it. So I just think that piece is important of talking. Again, it's that previewing of what is this going to look like. And colleges do have means for you to try it out and get some of your money back. There are specific dates for getting refunds on classes and credits, and it goes normally in a tier of 80%, then 60%, then 40%, based off of different deadlines. And so I'm not saying you need to have the firm answer, but know what this looks like. Let's try it out for a couple of weeks and then we'll make the decision by the 80% refund deadline or such on and so forth. One other piece, I want to pull in one other avenue for the hybrid model as we start to get ready to wrap up. With the hybrid model, all of the advice we gave for the in-person and the virtual are applicable because it's both of them. But I wanted to just explore a little bit, Sam. What should parents be expected to do to support their kids through this? And I'm not saying to take it all on their own, but I'm getting at this idea of knowing where to be and when to be. Is it fair for us to expect kids to just handle that on their own? Or should parents really be prepared to help them through this? And for how long do you think parents can expect to have to help them through this? Because this would be a totally new behavior, a totally new setup for them. So is it reasonable for parents to say, okay, 3 days the first week, 2 days the second week, 1 day the third week, go, succeed? How involved should parents expect to be with that?
Well, I think I think that it's good that you bring that up, and it's a good example of kind of what we teach parents and in our interactions with them, which is you can't go from doing everything for them to just expecting them to do it themselves, right? And so we certainly want to find the middle ground in between those two things. And so, we don't want to micromanage the process at such a level in the fall that the kids say to us, where am I going today? What am I doing? Where am I supposed to be? And just telling them and getting them through. I think it's a good experience. It's a good opportunity to teach them agility, to teach them how to keep up with things. And so, I think that in the beginning, just like when we talk about other things like direct instruction and guided practice, I think that it's going to be our responsibility to have that conversation with them. This is what your schedule looks like. And in the beginning, I'm going to remind you until you get used to it. And eventually you're going to be able to follow this schedule on your own. And this is the way the schedule looks. Mondays this is going to look like this. Tuesday is going to look like this. How can we remember what each day looks like? What type of calendar or planner or organizer or visual prompt or visual schedule can we use that will make sense for you to remember? And some days, some schools are following red days and black days, or black days and white days, and red days and blue days, or A days and B days, or in the mornings and then in the afternoons. Well, but there will be some level of consistency. And so there's going to be shifting, but shifting with consistency, finding the system, teaching a system of keeping that information organized, and then slowly having the students be responsible for being the ones that tell you where they need to be, rather than you telling them where they need to be. And so it's moving them from teaching them and guiding them to helping them to see that they can do it without you. But I think, even with the changes, there's still going to be consistency, and you just need to figure out how to keep that information organized.
And I'll just give a very tangible strategy here. Think about it. Think about yourselves. How do you know where you need to be and when you need to be there? What I tend to do Sundays, whether it's earlier in the day or at night, I look at my week. I get an understanding of what does my overall week look like. I don't need to know the details, but generally, what am I doing this week? That's going to be important for any hybrid model with your kids. So if it is like a 3-day, 2-day, and I keep using that example because it's the most complex. There might be something that's in between that, but is it a 3-day week? Is it a 2-day week? Or is it a 1-day in-person week? What is the week that we're going into? That should become a habit and a routine of Sundays we're looking at our week. And then even more reinforced might be nights before. So a lot of parents have the experience of helping kids get their backpacks ready for the next day. This should be incorporated, because no longer is it a constant of I'm going to school tomorrow. You see this a lot more with college students, where there is already differentiation. Monday is my 9 a.m. start, Tuesday is my 10:30 start. But how do they remember that? It's on Monday night, they say, oh, tomorrow's Tuesday, I need to wake up at this time. Formalize that process with them at first. What does my week look like? I do that on Sundays. What does my tomorrow look like? I do that every night. And do that out loud with them. And slowly, as Sam said, you might need to support them less on that. But one of the essential pieces for that I really want you guys to start thinking about, if there's a hybrid model, and this is useful even for anything, this is a very generalized strategy. If you can't help them identify where to find this information, how should they be able to figure that out? Or even further, who would you ask to find that out? Let's teach them to ask that. Once you access the how should I even know this, how do I know how many days I need to go in person this week? How do I know where I should be tomorrow? Then you're going to be able to better explicitly instruct them in guided practice. Now, they don't teach this as much in school. These are the executive functions of how do I know where I need to be? And so this is a great opportunity to teach them a lifelong skill. You can slowly get them to the point of you're helping them at first of you have to drive them to school, slowly shift that responsibility of you should tell me when I need to drive you to school. But that might take a couple of months to get there. Might take a couple of months of you guiding them through that practice. And one of the ways it might look is, do you need me to drive you to school tomorrow? And the response often will be, I don't know. How will you know? Well, you'll tell me. No, I won't. Let's figure that out together. And slowly you pull away some of those questions, and you'll slowly start to see that they jump between those questions on their own in their head. They're the ones saying, when you say to them, do I need to drive you to school? They're going to know you're going to say back to them, well, I need to figure that out. So it's through that slow practice of it. So that is a useful, it's self-monitoring, and the ability to know what do I need to do is a universal skill. So invest your time in that. And that can be for virtual, that can be for in-person, that could be for hybrid. It's just most important for hybrid because it's changing circumstances. But it's something that we do through everything. We're prompting ourselves thinking, what is the future and how do I prepare for it? And so investing your time as a parent in guiding your kids through that thought process, no matter how old they are, is going to set them up with a lifetime skill. And that you'll get a high payoff from investing your time. I don't know if you had anything else to add in there, Sam, but I think your final comments, and then we can wrap this up.
I think, I think that, people should just remember that it's not easy, and it's not meant for us to work at home full time and educate our children full time at home as well. And if people are struggling with that, which, is totally justifiable and understanding, that there are, resources out there that can help you to provide supports for your students, so that you could take a little bit of that burden off of yourself. We're here and more than happy to speak to anybody. I don't know, Casey, if you want to just talk 1 minute about our parent forum, because even just the parent forum could be a very helpful resource for a lot of families out there.
Yeah, so there's two things I'll wrap this all up with. One, we do have a weekly parent forum. Anyone can join. There is a link. If you want to email me, I can send it over to you. Any of you on our mailing list will be getting that weekly anyway. Anyone can join. So you can share that with whatever networks of people may benefit to take a more case study approach to some issues you're facing. Please do join. It's a way that we can give back, and we just try to be helpful. The one other thing I wanted to focus on, not focus on, but just really bring up, this was heavily focused on the academic and executive function components of school. It is not the only things to consider here. Stay tuned for upcoming webinars, blogs, things that we're putting out, because I want to just make sure that the social aspect is included in this understanding. That some other factors that help build up independence weren't as discussed here. Some corrective feedback in social situations is something you can get from in-person schooling, but virtual you don't. There's so much to talk on this topic, so we focused more on that academic learning and executive functioning piece today, but there will be more on these other factors that aren't as easy, that I know a lot of parents got exposure to, of realizing teachers do a lot more than just teach in school. And so stay tuned for more on some of those other topics to come up in the future. So thank you very much, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Sam. I know it's not easy talking about personal situations, so I appreciate your constant allowing of us to use your family as like a little case study model. You're our guinea pig and often our feedback loop here. So I appreciate it.
They are quite the case study, that's for sure.
So thank you, everyone, and I hope everyone, until we see you again, I hope you guys all have a great rest of summer.
Thanks.
Thanks again, Sam. Have a good one, guys.